So hello again. So after having an overview on the main components or the main layers of the architecture of Spring Boot, right now we're gonna make things into practice. So we're gonna try first to start by building some layers, and especially the entity layers. So as far as we are using Spring Boot, we're gonna try to divide our project into some packages. It is extremely recommended because it helps you to organize your project, especially when you will have tons of classes, and that's why we're gonna try here to create a new package from the main package. So we're gonna call it like this entities, uh, like this. So and in this package we're gonna try to create a class. So for example, let's pretend that we will have a student class. So student, yeah, and also that's a common practice that we will do, creating a package, and each one is corresponding to a certain layer. So first, let us define the attributes of that class. First, we have the and also one thing that all the attributes should be declared private. So yeah, it adds some kind of security into the application. So private, for example, long ID. So we have an ID. Let's say, for example, private string first name, first name, and private string last name, name. Just clear this. And also let's have another thing, which is private string, for example, email. So by this, we have created our first class. But in order to declare that this class will be considered as an entity by Spring Boot, we're going to add another annotation, which is the entity annotation. There are many entities, but you will start to get them just by practicing. So they're really simple. It just takes some time in order to practice them and to know a lot about them. So this is the first entity that was declared as for our Spring Boot application. But let us see. There's an error. What is there? Is this error? We should also add the attribute. We should also add an annotation to our ID because simply Spring Boot considers that each annotation has a certain ID. But for Spring Boot right now, it doesn't recognize this ID as a real ID. That's why we need to add another annotation, which is the ID, like this. So by this, we have everything set up and everything is ready to go. We have another annotation that I'm going to try to explain right now, which is the generated value. So how this ID will be generated in our on the database side. For example, there are a lot of strategies, and among them there is this strategy, which is generation type identity. So here is up to Spring Boot, or is up to the database to create to create that ID in or yeah after pursuing some kind of generation type, which is the identity. What is exactly the identity? Let us just here to explain. The indicates that the persistence provider must assign primary keys for the entity using a database identity column. That's what we try to say. So here it's up to the database to create or to consider this ID as a primary key. So the database will try to make the ID unique, and it will check that this ID unique, and also it will attribute to each field a certain value. And yeah, that's all. But here we need to get something really important, which is the getters and the setters, because as you could remember, we have declared or we have already said that the variables or the attributes should be declared private. That's why we need to add the getters and the setters. And also we need to add a lot of things, for example, toString, some methods like toStrings and others. And that's why we're going to add an annotation, which is here. And here comes the role of the Lombok. Is the Lombok annotation that will take care of all these methods, and it will create them just from one annotation, which is the annotation data. And also, but here the annotation data does not include the constructor. That's why, for example, in each class we need a constructor in order to instantiate and create objects from this class. That's why we need two kinds of constructor. The no args constructor. For example, if you want to declare some object but it is completely empty, and also the all args constructor. If for example we want to create some constructor with all the fields. But sometimes you just need to create some constructor and declare some fields null, and that's why in some cases we just need to configure the constructor depending on the needs that we require in order to build our application. And by that we have finished. The entity is good and ready to go. Let us now, before completing this video, I'm going to try to explain also another layer, which is the GPA repository that we have already explained, that it kind of established that connection or the persistence between the database and also the backend. That's why we're going to do it, and we're going to pursue the same methodology, create a new package from the main package and call it repositories. And for the repositories, it is completely different. We do not create a Java class, but rather we create an interface, because we're gonna create an interface, and that interface will just we're just gonna declare all the methods or the methods that we need, and the GPA repository will just take care of the implementation based on something called the genericity. If you are familiar with the genericity, what is the genericity exactly? Is that we create sometimes some methods, but just independently of the type that we need. For example, without the need of a certain type. For example, if we want to create a kind of method, but does not only is not applied only to a certain kind of type. For example, it's not applied to a string or is not applied just to an integer. We just try to create some methods called the generic methods that will include or that will treat all the types. So those methods will be executed independently on the type. That is the generation. And the GPL repository is kind of smart, and it uses that kind of methodology in order to provide code and in order to provide some basic implementations. So that's why we're gonna create the GPL repository, and we're gonna call it student repository. It's kind of a common practice here. And after creating that GPA repository, we're going to add another annotation, which is the repository. It's like we are telling Springboard that this interface will be treated as a repository, but that's not all. We should extend the GPA repository because it's the main class or the mother class. So extend the GPA repository. And here we should indicate also the type or the type of object or the class or the entity that we want to treat, which is the student, and also one thing, which is the type of the ID that we want to treat, which is the long, because we have indicated that the ID will be considered as long. And by that, we have a lot of methods that I have already implemented. But for example, if we want to add another method or another method or another, for example, kind of treatment, we just need to declare here the name of the method and also the type of the method. For example, if we wanna, for example, get the email or get the students based on its email, and that's why we're gonna just create this method, which is student, for example, which is the return type, and here we're gonna try to find by like this, and also we're gonna try to add here the find by email, and based here, email should be like this, for example, and no, not like this. Just let me correct. And in here we're gonna just add for example, the parameters that we're gonna search for that student. For example, here I'm gonna say that for the parameter it will be a student or just an ID, for example, to make it a lot more practical. And that's it. We have defined our method, and we can already use the implementation freely. So this is how we could or how we work with the GPA repository and with the students. So that's all for the for this video. In the next videos, we're gonna focus more on providing more about the controllers and the services.